This is Steel Dragon 2000. It's a roller coaster located at Nagashima Spa Land in Kuwana, Japan that reaches a maximum height of 318 feet or 96 meters, a max speed of 95 miles per hour or 153 kilometers per hour, and features all sorts of drops, hills, and turns. But what makes Steel Dragon 2000 so special is that it's commonly known as the longest roller coaster in the world. Except there's one problem with that. It's not. In fact, it's not the second longest, third, fourth, fifth, or even in the top 10. Steel Dragon 2000 is the 12th longest operating roller coaster in the world. The reason for that is because of this. In case you're unfamiliar, this is a mountain, and one day in 1996, a German company called Brandauer decided to slap a roller coaster on one of them. Over the years, these mountain coasters, also known as alpine coasters, got much longer and much more advanced, progressing to the thrilling experiences they provide today. But despite the enjoyability of these rides, mountain coasters seem to have gone under the radar, so much so that I've barely heard any people talk about them. To be honest, that's a shame because alpine coasters are some of the most fun rides in the world. They're completely unique in the global amusement landscape in that they're almost always independent from theme parks, unlike quote-unquote normal roller coasters. Because of this, unless you've made a stop specifically for an alpine coaster or other small grouping of rides including the coaster, it's pretty much impossible to have experienced one. This lack of exposure is largely why I believe mountain coasters to be severely underrated. Even though they provide just as fun and thrilling of an experience as normal roller coasters, hardly anyone knows because hardly anyone has actually experienced a good one. Before this past summer, I used to be in the same boat, having only ridden one mountain coaster and not a highly regarded one, but my perception of them changed drastically for the better upon further exposure. What I realized is that alpine coasters are amazing both in experience and in concept, because whizzing down a mountain, as it turns out, is so unbelievably fun. Mountain coasters are worth making stops for, and they're even worth going out of the way to discover. There truly is a separate world of alpine coasters, often far off the beaten path away from theme parks. And as you'll see, this world is amazing. But before I get to the intricacies of alpine coasters, there's a lot of misconceptions and things that were unclear to me about these rides that it's best to know about so you can maximize your overall experience. First off, how they work. Mountain coasters are roller coasters that, instead of being on level ground, travel along the ground winding down a large hill. Depending on the size of the mountain coaster, you'll either enter the station at the bottom of the hill and go on a lift hill to the top, or if it's a longer ride, take a ski lift to the station at the top. In some cases, you go down the mountain first and then ride back up, but that seems to be much less common. Alpine coasters are pay per ride, with some having discounts for multiple rides. If the coaster has a ski lift, you'll have to pay extra for that unless you want to walk, which I was told takes about 1 to 2 hours depending on the coaster. I would recommend just paying the extra 5 or 6 euros unless you want to walk uphill for hours. In terms of alpine coaster manufacturers, there are a few main ones. By far the most prominent is Vegan. They account for 69% of all mountain coasters, however there's also a few others such as Brandauer, Sunkid, and Aquatic Development. Operating mountain coasters is pretty easy. They either have a lever on each side or in the middle so you can control your speed, and you're restrained by a simple seatbelt. If you choose not to brake, you'll be going very fast. Of course, this is what I did, but almost all of these rides have some sort of automatic braking system so that you can't round tight turns at Mach speed and fly off the track. The ability to control speed causes my main issue with mountain coasters, something that has nothing to do with the rides themselves. It's about the people on them, specifically the people that go miserably slow right in front of me and force me to go slow the whole way down. I want to clarify that I have no problem with these people, they're going the speed they feel safe at, and it's important to remember that not everyone's a thrill-seeking maniac like me. However, it can be very annoying when you pay and wait for a ride that is essentially ruined by the actions of others. But don't worry, there are ways to ensure this doesn't happen. Number 1. Assume things about people based on how they look. Wait, that came out wrong. What I mean by that is, for example, don't get in line right behind an 80-year-old woman since she's more than likely to go pretty slow. What you want to do is create as much distance between you and the slowpokes as possible. The best way to do this is to waste a ton of time before you leave the station, no matter who's in front of you. Some operators take a lot of time before sending cars, which is good, but others try to send them often to decrease wait times and increase capacity. This is probably the only time I'll ever say this, but fuck capacity. Take your time. When you get up to the ride operator, tie your shoes. Forget to put the seatbelt on and then fumble with it. Put the kid's seatbelt on over your legs only to unbuckle it seconds later. Ask the operator questions about the levers, ask if it's scary, act like a complete and utter idiot, break down into tears, pretend to throw up, fake a heart attack, I don't care and neither should you. Whatever gets you the most distance from the person in front of you, because that's what this is really about. So now that you've manipulated a random worker into thinking that you're a bumbling buffoon, you have a clear path with no obstructions and can enjoy your ride. So what is that ride like? Well, mountain coasters vary in length, speed, and elements, but all of them are pretty similar in terms of the experience itself. They mostly consist of tight turns, bunny hills, steep drops, and downward straightaways. What puts some of them ahead of the others are three main factors. First off is the view. Because alpine coasters are located on hills, there's always great scenery and plenty of things to look at. Sometimes the coaster will even go into the lush woods or somewhere with streams running by, which is a very nice touch. Overall though, the view is probably the least important of the three. Next is the layout of the ride and the elements it includes. Like I said, a lot of maneuvers are the same from coaster to coaster, but sometimes a ride will include a random demonic element like an unbelievably tight turn or a quad down with RMC level ejector airtime. Length is a big part of layout as well. Because mountain coasters are more focused on vibes and less on objectivity with forces, the longer it is, the more fun it seems to be. But unlike normal roller coasters, layout is not the most important factor that makes alpine coasters great. That would go to pacing. The speed at which you take each ride is the primary factor that determines how enjoyable and thrilling it is, which is why it's important to make sure you go as fast as possible. Of course, you can control the speed at which you ride to a certain extent, but every mountain coaster has an automatic braking system, like I mentioned before. The strength of this braking system is what determines the pacing. If it engages easily, the ride is slower and less enjoyable, but if it very rarely slows the car down, you go faster and the ride is therefore more fun. One thing I noticed in regards to pacing is that even on the same coaster, some cars seem to run faster than others. I observed that newer cars, those with shiny paint on the levers, ran slower than those with worn out paint. I don't know if this is indicative of mountain coasters as a whole, please comment if you know the truth behind it, but that's just what I found. So if you see that you're lined up to ride in a newly painted car, maybe consider taking a fake phone call or tying your shoe, and graciously let the person behind you go ahead, as long as they're not old. So that's more or less what mountain coasters as a whole are, long, exhilarating rides down a mountain whose experience you can partially control. But as I mentioned earlier, finding alpine coasters isn't as simple as going to your local theme park. In fact, there may not be a mountain coaster within 100 miles of you. The main reason for this is in the name, mountain coaster. Not very many people happen to live on or near a mountain, and as a result, access to these rides is extremely limited. This is mainly the case in the United States, which is home to only 54 alpine coasters. Furthermore, most of these 54 are located in various hotspots along the country's biggest mountain ranges in places like Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and Branson, Missouri. And unless you live or travel close to one of those mountain ranges, as an American, you could be hours away from the nearest mountain coaster, much like I am. But I want you to shift your focus away from America because while mountain coasters in the US are pretty cool, they're nothing compared to mountain coasters in Europe. European alpine coasters are prominent on the mainland and pretty evenly spread throughout the continent. However, much like the US, which has a couple hotspots, there is one major European center for mountain coasters. I'm talking about the Alps, the massive mountain range stretching all the way from southeast France to Slovenia, passing through Switzerland, northern Italy, and Austria on its way. Scattered throughout the Alps are most of the world's best alpine coasters, perfectly nestled above charming mountain towns of no more than a few thousand people, and streaming down hills with some of the best views in the world. Most of the mountain coasters I mentioned I rode this past summer were in the Alps, and riding them, coupled with breathtaking scenery, was an unforgettable experience. However, that experience almost didn't happen due to the fact that there's not that much available information on mountain coasters, especially those outside the US. For example, if I were planning a coaster-related trip to a random place, let's just say Australia, I'd watch a video or two on the best roller coasters and theme parks there to act as a guide for what places to visit. Mountain coaster-wise, that information is very hard to come by, and it led to me spending hours on RCDB and Captain Coaster, among other sites, trying to handpick which ones to attempt riding. And don't worry, later in this video I'll clear up all that confusion. Ultimately though, my list was narrowed down to 5 really good ones, some of the best in the world, and even though I now look back and see that I missed a couple, those 5 mountain coasters in the Alps were all incredible. So here they are, ranked worst to best. In 5th is Rodelbahn Flumser at Flumserberg in Korten, Switzerland. This is the shortest mountain coaster out of the 5 with a length of 6,758 feet or 2,059 meters, and despite its short length compared to the others, it'd still be the 3rd longest normal roller coaster in the world. The reason it places last is not because it's bad, rather it's just not as good as the others. The layout and pacing are the worst among the 5, and some good views aren't enough to put it ahead of the other 4. If you're going through the Alps stopping for mountain coasters, you can skip this one, especially since it's very expensive like everything in Switzerland. One ride on this, including the chairlift to the top, costs 25 euros. But if you have the choice, the time, and the money, I'd give Rodelbahn Flumser a try. Up next is the first coaster in the Alps I rode, Alpsee Coaster at Alpsee Bergwelt in Immenstadt, Germany. This was a great first large-scale alpine coaster for me because it's probably the most typical out of the 5 I did. That's not a bad thing, of course, and there are a few sections that are legitimately scary, like this double down into a tight downward turn. Alpsee has a few of these tight turns that dive down, more so than other mountain coasters, and they're really fun, crazy elements that provide incredible laterals. If I were to look at it critically, there are a few so-called dead spots, so that's why it's not as high as the 3 above it. However, it's still amazing and easily worth doing. In third is Alpine Coaster at Golm in Van Dans, Austria, and I'd say this has easily the best view out of any mountain coaster I've done. In addition to the scenery you experience on the coaster itself, passing through a lush forest with rivers and racing down the mountain itself, the views from the parking lot are also incredible, looking out over the vast Alps with a beautiful reservoir in front. The ride itself, like I mentioned, is incredibly picturesque, with a really good layout containing some sudden dips and sharp turns. One major problem I had with it though is that on my first ride the pacing was really bad. I'd never had my hand on the brake and I still ended up going much slower than those around me. This led me to pick up on the whole new train thing I said related to pacing, because on my second ride when I was in a car with worn down paint on the levers, I went substantially faster. So if you do get a good car, Alpine Coaster Golm is well worth visiting. Coming in second is one of the most highly regarded mountain coasters in the world, if not the most. Hassenhorn Coaster at Hassenhorn Rodelbahn in Tottenau, Germany has undoubtedly the best pacing on any alpine coaster I've done, and as it stands on its own, it's probably the best. The reason it comes in second has nothing to do with the ride itself, but rather with the people who ride it. This was probably the most popular mountain coaster I did, with a wait of up to 30 minutes, and waiting in that line was a lot of people who really didn't want to go fast. On my first ride, despite stalling a bit, I quickly caught up to the person in front of me, which essentially ruined my ride. On my second ride though, I pulled out every trick in the book to stall the operator and it resulted in an incredible experience. I had the track to myself for pretty much all of the layout, and even though there was a pileup a ways in front of me, I thought I was going to fly off the track because of how fast I was going. Hassenhorn Coaster has very little automatic braking, if it has any at all. The layout isn't amazing, but again that doesn't matter as much as pacing on mountain coasters, and this coaster's pacing is second to none. Just make sure you stall as much as possible at the top. Because of the crowds, the operator will try to send you pretty fast, but do not give in. Use all my tricks from earlier and you will have an unbelievable experience on this coaster. But the best overall alpine coaster I've ridden is Rodelbahn Praterschier in Schurwalden, Switzerland. This takes everything great about mountain coasters and combines it all into one ride. It's long and fast-paced with some demonic elements like this diabolical quad down that delivers crazy ejector airtime. Something unique to this one that I didn't know about beforehand is that you can get 2 rides for the price of 1 if you buy your tickets before 10:30 and get both rides in before 11. This really helped me because I was there early and would have wanted another ride anyway since the coaster's so good, but prices in Switzerland are unbelievably high. One ride on Rodelbahn Praterschier costs the equivalent of 31 euros. If you do decide to ride it though, I guarantee it'll be amazing. But those 5 certainly aren't the only mountain coasters in the Alps, and mountain coasters in the Alps certainly aren't the only ones in the world. I've ridden 2 more outside of the Alps, mountain coaster at Skistar Hammarbybacken in Stockholm, and Sommerrodelbahn Gutach in southwest Germany, both of which are absolutely worth doing if you're in the area. However, in terms of the world's best mountain coasters, a few come to mind. Now keep in mind that reviews of mountain coasters as a whole are extremely limited, so nobody can 100% say what the highest rated mountain coasters are. These are just some that seem really good. Probably the most obvious is the world's longest alpine coaster, Tobotronc at Naturlandia in Andorra. Outside of its length and the fact that it uses an actual lift hill instead of a ski lift, there doesn't seem to be anything too special about Tobotronc. From POVs, it seems to have really good pacing and a decent layout. Almost every mountain coaster I've mentioned in this video so far has been a traditional one built by Wiegand. But there's a few other manufacturers I brought up earlier that also manufacture alpine coasters, one of them being Brandauer. Brandauer makes single rail mountain coasters, and while I haven't ridden any of them, I've heard they have fantastic pacing. Probably the best one is some Rodelbahn Seilsplitz in Meters, Austria. I was actually less than 10 minutes away from this while I was traveling, but didn't even know it existed due to a lack of available information. Looking back, I'm disappointed in a way because I would have wanted to experience this ride as well as a few others, but like I mentioned earlier, there's not any specific place to research good mountain coasters worth riding. When you consider the hundreds of alpine coasters in the world and the complexity of their locations, that makes it difficult to even know what exists, let alone to identify which ones are actually worth stopping at. This is especially true in continental Europe, where it seems like mountain coasters are everywhere, but the really good ones are hard to find if you're trying to pick the best. Like I said, I had this problem when planning a trip, and I can now imagine many of you having that same issue. Which is why I decided to fix it. I put together a comprehensive map of all the great mountain coasters in the world onto Google Maps, so now you can see all in one place where the best ones are. I included every continent except Antarctica and tried to limit the map to only include the better ones in places like the Alps that have a variety of options. I highly encourage you to check it out once the video's over. And as you could probably assume, that took a lot of time and effort to put together, but it's something I'm really passionate about. After my experiences this past summer, I've come to realize how fun mountain coasters are and how much I adore them. So because of that, I want you all to have the same experiences as me and feel the same things I did. As much as I've talked about the intricacies of alpine coasters so far, judging their layouts and scrutinizing their pacing, that's not what they're about. Like I said, this type of ride is different from a traditional roller coaster in so many ways. Alpine coasters aren't focused on airtime, positives, hang time filled inversions, or anything like that, and shouldn't be judged based on what they include. That's why I don't include mountain coasters in my personal coaster rankings. For example, I'm uploading a video next month on my top 25 roller coasters in Europe, subscribe so you don't miss it, but there aren't any mountain coasters in there, even though I probably enjoyed one or two of them more than the traditional roller coasters at the bottom of the list. And the reason for that is that the primary focus of alpine coasters, to me at least, is fun. I went in depth with this topic in my Ride to Happiness video, but a lot of times I feel that coaster enthusiasts, myself included, spend a lot of time overanalyzing and critiquing rides that are built for the sole purpose of entertaining their riders. And that's what mountain coasters do for me, give pure unadulterated joy. They embody the idea that a roller coaster doesn't have to be super fast or tall or pull the craziest forces to deliver a really fun experience. Sometimes a great coaster is one that flips upside down a bunch of times, and sometimes it's just one that travels down a hill with a sprawling view of mountain, towns, and greenery ahead of it. Which is what mountain coasters do so well, the simple things. If you're like me and want to feel that bliss beyond what normal coasters can provide, check out that list in the description. Find one and go ride it. And the good thing is it doesn't really matter if you go on the longest alpine coaster in the world or the shortest, the one with the best layout or the worst. Because there are no steel vengeances in the world of mountain coasters. You make your own steel vengeance. So if you have experienced one of these rides, truly experienced what they have to offer, I'd like to think you agree with me. But I'm even more envious of you if you've never ridden a single mountain coaster, because you have a whole world out there waiting for you. So go explore it.